Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Grace Nerds podcast. It has been a minute, hasn't it? Yes,
Yeah, it has.
it has. What's it been? I think my last video upload was like according to YouTube 3 weeks ago, and that wasn't even the
Oh
live
wow.
stream. That was my movie review.
Yeah,
And so yeah, I think it's been about a month for various reasons.
that sounds about
Mostly
right.
the holidays, nothing unusual, but yeah,
Yeah, just I
yeah.
think it's like a string of holiday stuff. You throw in there that you've got like all sorts of these like programs and I don't know, all the stuff that makes the holiday season busy.
Yes, indeed. Let me share the podcast on my Facebook feed here. I never do this. We really should. uh, join us.
Or die.
Share. There we go. All right. So, are we ready?
Indeed.
I will hit the intro. All right. So, as I said, welcome everyone to the Grace Nerds podcast. My name is Eric. This is my friend Caleb. If you're new, make sure that you go ahead and like and subscribe and all that good stuff. If you're watching now or in the future, let's see if my special little button works here. Yay! There we go.
Dun.
Dun, dun, dun. All right. So, we've got, I'd say, 3 segments planned tonight. And we're going to basically be getting into the Christmas spirit a little bit, I think. We're going to have our movie of the week. I think we're going to skip trivia this week. We may still have it in the future a bit, but we'll see what happens. But we'll have our sort of news headline, which is not going to be as Christmas related, really at all. But it'll be interesting. We're a little bit late to the game on the news story, but it's given us, I think, a good sort of overarching view of things, which is good. Better, anyways. So yeah, we'll have our news headline, and then we'll have our theology corner, which will be back to some holiday talk, I would say. So, are we ready to dive into our movie of the week?
I think so.
Okie doke. Alrighty. So, Caleb, what are we talking about this week?
We are talking about the beloved holiday classic, It's a Wonderful Life.
My lips bleeding, Bert. All right. So, how do you like this movie? Do you enjoy this movie?
So this is a tough one for me. It was years before I finally watched this movie,
Uh-huh.
and I enjoyed it. And then I think because of just Christmas traditions that my wife and I have, I think I kind of got over it a little bit.
Oh, well,
I
that's
haven't.
just
Yeah,
blasphemy. Are you crazy?
I know it is, right?
You can't get
Um,
sick of this movie.
it hasn't made its way back into our yearly repeat for a couple years, so
Yeah, I mean,
it's probably due. But
I
we're
have yet
pretty
to watch it this
consistent.
year, so I probably
Okay.
should soon.
We're pretty consistent in like watching the same Christmas movies every year. So it's probably time to put it back in the rotation.
Maybe we should talk about. Oh, okay. So this one. Well, I can't say I've watched it every year, but I've watched it plenty of times, plenty of Christmases.
Mhm.
Another one that I've seen plenty of times growing up with my mom was Alistair Sim's Christmas Carol.
Oh,
Have you
okay.
ever seen that?
I haven't
The Alistair Sim Christmas Carol.
I haven't seen that one. The one that we typically watch was done in the 70s and
Mhm.
it in well, maybe it was. I don't know. Let me Google real quick. I'll get
Oh
back
no.
to you on that one.
Yeah, well, I only say that because maybe while we're still in Christmas spirit, if we do one more show before Christmas, which I don't know if we will, but if we do, I would highly recommend you watch Alistair Sim's Christmas Carol, and then we can talk about A Christmas Carol. That would be a fun.
Oh.
That'd be a
So
fun
his
one.
is 1951.
Yeah, it's an oldie. It's so good. It's like it is the best Christmas Carol you'll ever see.
So we watched the one that actually had his name? Well, this is embarrassing because I should absolutely know this.
Uh-huh.
He played Obi-Wan Alec Guinness.
Alec Guinness.
Wow,
Okay.
that was like super embarrassing.
Oh no. Well, I
Um,
can't say I've heard of that one.
it's Albert Finney in it, and it's just called Scrooge.
Okay, I've probably heard of it.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's an interesting one. Has an interesting take on hell, and yeah, it's interesting. It's the only reason that's the yearly one is because that's the one Schnell likes. So
Yeah. Well, you got to watch the Alistair Sim one. Just
I'll have to check it out.
for my sake, and show her. Maybe it'll become her new favorite.
Yeah.
It's my mom's favorite, and it is
Okay.
like the best I've ever seen. So,
Well, my favorite currently is the Muppets Christmas
oh come
Carol.
on, now get out of here with that nonsense. I don't know. Maybe it's fine. I think
good.
I think I saw that once. But, eh. All right.
That's
So,
the best
anyways,
music.
back to It's a Wonderful Life. So the getting over it aside, like what was your first feeling about the movie when you first watched it? Did you enjoy it?
I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the first time I watched it, I did enjoy it. It just took me years to get to. I
Mhm.
do recall, I want to say my dad watching it a couple times as a kid, seeing him watch it, but never sitting down and watching it with him.
Mhm.
Maybe it was just on in the background or something. And yeah, but I enjoyed it. I think the first time I saw it in its original black and white, all that good stuff.
I think I'm trying to think if I've ever seen it colorized. Maybe once. I don't know.
Yeah, the colorized version of it, it's pretty hokey, the colorization that they did.
Yeah.
So the black and white is actually better, I think. But
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Usually go with the original. Come on.
yeah, I enjoy it. I think it there was a lot of tension in that film.
Mhm.
Like it has a good range of emotions, which I
Mhm.
think is good. But I think that also might have been one of the reasons why I kind of needed a break, was because of the, like, every time I watched it with, like, I get so anxious, like waiting for the end, and
Yeah. Every time, what's his name? Uncle Billy or whatever.
yeah,
He loses the money in the newspaper. It's like, if only, Now, okay,
Yeah.
I'll throw this in here as an aside. Have you ever seen the SNL sketch where
I
they?
have not.
Oh, I want to. Okay, hold on a second here. Hold on a second here. I have to do this. I might risk a bit of a copyright claim here. I don't know, but I'm recording this, so it's not that bad. Let me open up our. All right, I don't want to spoil this article we're going to look at, but we're going to talk the politics of the movie as well a little bit. But let me see here. It's a Wonderful Life, SNL. SNL. There it is. Okay. This was Dana Carvey back in the day.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight marks an historic,
Oh, I don't
not to
think
say
I got it.
unique moment in the history of both television and cinema.
All right, so basically,
without
we won't
further
watch
ado,
the whole
here
thing.
is
Risk a
the lost
copyright strike. So
So
deleted scene. So do you remember at the end of It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Potter never gets his comeuppance, does he?
No.
Because he takes that money, he never gives it back, and no one finds out he stole it, right? But that actually was in the movie, but it was a deleted scene, don't you know? And SNL found it, right? They beat up Mr. Potter, so there you go. Just thought I'd throw that in as an aside. It always makes me laugh when I think about it. But anyways, so anyways, where were we? What brought that on?
I don't know. What did bring that on?
Oh, you were talking about the suspense that you feel.
Oh, yeah.
And how we feel, how you feel when I don't think we're going to copyright strike there. I skipped around a lot, Dad. My dad's commenting on editing it out. I don't think we'll have to. I think we'll be okay. But anyways, yeah, we always feel that emotion in the movie that it gets like so stressful towards the end every time you watch it. But
yeah.
So what? Okay, so we're probably going to talk about the spiritual themes here, but it is kind of funny. Like, we've talked so much about politics to a certain extent particularly certain themes. Strangely enough, they might come up again a little bit here in a bit, and they're kind of connected to the spiritual themes. But how would you relate this movie to Christianity? It's not hard. I mean, there's an overt spiritual element throughout the movie.
Yeah.
How sound is it? I mean, it's kind of supposed to be a little whimsical, but how, the whimsicalness aside, like the themes that it touches on, you can think whatever about the angels and Clarence and all that, and I mean, whatever. I don't make much of it, but
Right.
I mean, who knows? Maybe it works that way a little bit. It's not necessarily.
Never know.
I don't know. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think as far as just like some basic themes, I think good triumphing over evil in the end. Although I never really considered the fact that Potter doesn't really ever. You never see a resolution with him.
Mm-hmm.
But good ultimately triumph over evil. You see, really the community they're rallying around George, all that good stuff. George is a guy that makes a lot of sacrifices for others. Loves his community, loves his family. Obviously, he goes through a really dark time here in the movie. And he struggles to do the right thing, but in the end, he does the right thing.
Yeah.
And
I think it's kind of poetic, Potter not getting his comeuppance per se. He does by nature of who he is.
Yeah.
In that, even though everything could be pinned on George Bailey for his screw up, as it were, like everything he did through his life had resolution in that his friends that he took care of for his whole life wouldn't just let him go like that. They wouldn't just believe something like that about him because of the way he lived his whole life. Yeah. Whereas, Potter kind of got a win in the end, but the way he lived his whole life, it was no help to him.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of, I guess, the point in a sense. He doesn't need to get beat up. His very existence came to a point where it was its own punishment. It's kind of interesting. However, back when this movie came out, there were some political turmoil going on in that era, and it led to some questions about this movie. And I think they're worthwhile questions, even though some people might find this kind of silly. It does kind of cause me to ask, what should we think about this? So I'm going to bring up a Snopes article, actually. And judging by the title of the article, it'll sort of spark the topic a little bit. So let's take a look here. Let me jump over here, and this should just work if I go like this. All right. Did the FBI once deem It's a Wonderful Life communist propaganda? Why would they do this? Do you remember the history surrounding this? Maybe you can give us a little summary.
Yeah, so this would have been the age of McCarthyism and the Red Scare and Hollywood.
What was that for the total noobs?
Yeah, so what if this? What year was?
This was in the 40s, wasn't it?
The 40s, yeah. So McCarthy was
maybe after. I don't know.
Was he a senator or congressman?
I feel like
he was in politics.
Senator. I think senator.
Yeah.
Make me feel ignorant when you ask me the difference between the two. But
So I remember listening to a podcast about him recently, and he kind of got his start into this hoping to make a name for himself. So he was okay with being a little bit crazy because he was trying to be, he was trying to climb the political ladder, and this was going to get his name out there. So he would threaten people.
You might throw in some details here that I don't know about. So continue,
maybe,
please.
Never know. He would threaten people with, legal action if he, that they were on some list that he had secretly from the FBI of all known communists in the country. And so he really caused a scare in the nation because people started to go like, is my neighbor a communist? You know, all
My
this kind
dad
of
my
stuff.
dad said senator, but he's gonna check.
Okay.
I think the term Senator McCarthy sounds right.
It does,
Yeah.
but you never know.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyways, continue.
and so, you know, people were really fearful of being brought under charges from him.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of people in Hollywood who were um, getting put on this supposed list. And the interesting thing is, I don't really know if there actually ever was a list. I think that's been
Oh.
debated or not. You know,
Uh-huh.
if I remember that part correctly,
Right.
I may be wrong again, but it kind of was just at his whim, you know,
Yeah.
whether somebody was actually on the list or not. But
Mhm.
in the course of it, he probably did expose a good number of actual communists
Uh-huh.
because people started to kind of rat others out, and I think that's really what started taking place in Hollywood.
Mhm.
You had informants that were basically ratting others out. Perhaps an odd mark in history is when Walt Disney kind of was one of those who was not on the side of being accused of being a communist. He kind of was on the opposite side of being one of those guys who would out certain communists and whatnot. So that's an interesting
Mhm.
earmark in
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it really wasn't surprising when you sent the article over that this would have fit that era,
Right.
when writers, producers, directors were kind of, and of course actors and actresses were being accused of communist propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah. And so here's the thing. McCarthy, from all I can tell, I mean, everyone seems unified the fact that he was pretty over the top.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty tyrannical period in a lot of ways because of this. That said, it wasn't a fake scare because
Right.
he was over the top doesn't mean there was no communist influence. There were overt self-avowed communists in Hollywood at the time. If you ever watched the movie Trumbo, it was an enjoyable movie, but they actually paint the communists pretty sympathetically. And who was the star of that? Bryan Cranston played Trumbo. You know, definitely well-produced movie, very enjoyable, but again, seems to have a pretty lefty agenda in it, kind of proving McCarthy's point a little bit, maybe, as to
Maybe.
where Hollywood has ended up these days. But, you know, again, I'm not, don't want to overstate that. But anyways, so let's look at this article a little bit so you can get why they say this. And the reason I want to do this is because, like, not to make too much commentary on the McCarthy era, but to ask about the themes that they noticed in here that made them ask that question. Okay, because it is interesting. Did the FBI once deem It's a Wonderful Life communist propaganda? So the answer is mostly true from Snopes. Some say Snopes has a political agenda too, which is arguable. But we'll leave that aside because this seems relatively innocuous and fact-based here. They have some good citations. What's true? As part of a sweeping investigation of communist infiltration into the motion picture industry, FBI agents in the 1940s included It's a Wonderful Life in a list of motion pictures disclosing communist propaganda therein, claiming two of its writers were friendly with known communists, quote unquote, and saying the film used communist tricks, such as portraying the businessman, Mr. Potter, as a villain. However, what is false? The FBI did not, in a formal or official manner, declare or designate It's a Wonderful Life to be communist propaganda. So it wasn't official, but it was, investigated, considered. During the 2021 holiday season, internet users enthusiastically shared articles and posts that described a fascinating episode from the history of a classic American Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. On December 21st, for example, the London Independent reported that It's a Wonderful Life was once considered communist propaganda by the FBI, while various outlets shared their own accounts of the story. Those accounts were broadly accurate and based on high-quality primary documentary evidence. Although the FBI did not ever formally, as an institution, declare It's a Wonderful Life to be communist propaganda, FBI agents and informants investigated the movie and the people behind it as such. As part of a sweeping investigation ordered by Bureau Director J. Edgar Hoover, a special agent in 1949 included the film in a list of motion pictures disclosing communist propaganda therein. We are issuing a rating of mostly true. That description of the movie, which was released in December 1946, can be found in an archived and redacted copy of the FBI report on communist infiltration into the motion picture industry, available here. Specifically, it can be found on page 12 of the 9th of 15 dossiers released under the Freedom of Information Act at some point in the ensuing decades. Let's see. All right, but it's not specifically clear who wrote It's a Wonderful Life. Interesting. So, from what I read in here, basically, they show that at the very least, like, writers and producers of the movie were friends with some communists. There was some evidence of them communicating with each other. Question is, was that the intention in the themes of the movie? What I found, I don't know how quick we want to dive into it. I'm just trying to think. What I found is, have you ever heard of well, most people haven't heard of it. I think this is original with James Lindsay, the sort of current political commentator, anti-communist podcaster, you might say. He talks about the Mott and Bailey form of argumentation that you might have with someone. Now, I'm going to butcher this, but basically, it's sort of castle combat imagery historically. We have the Mott and you have the Bailey, and I can't remember which is which, but basically, you have your very defensible castle, your castle walls, and it's a very safe place to lob attacks from without being harmed, but you don't make as much progress on the battlefield that way. But then you go down into the field in a more dangerous position where you can advance, but you're in more danger. Okay, so this is an illustration imagery for a form of argumentation that certain political activists will use. James Lindsay talks about this a lot when he talks about Marxists and culture, where they have a very defensible position that they'll use in a more popular level. For example, I care about people. I care about the poor. Don't you? Very defensible position that no one's going to disagree with, right? But then you turn your back. They come down to the more dangerous position. I can't remember. Like, again, one's the Mott, one's the Bailey, and I can't remember which means what. But basically, they come down to when you're not looking, they come down to the more dangerous position that has more radical goals. And then when you turn around and say, "Hey, you're actually saying this," like, "No, we're just saying this," they go back behind the defensible position again. And so, if this is true about It's a Wonderful Life, for instance, the themes are very agreeable to Christianity, I would say, in that you see a generous man who lives for his community, right? Something very defensible, very clearly Christian, like thinking of others above yourself, giving of your own resources. And it's very Christian, the dangers of wealth, the dangers of corruption among the rich, and how not to show favoritism toward the rich and how the rich should be generous. Those are all biblical themes. But the way that generally gets sort of hijacked by a Marxist per se is that in order to fight these quote unquote sins that Christians would call sins, or to promote these virtues, they'll try to enshrine them into law through like authoritarian redistribution systems. That's what they do while your back is turned, but then you turn around and say, "What are you doing?" "No, we just love people." Right? So that's the Mott and Bailey sort of principle, right?
Yep.
And so the question is that's what's happening here with It's a Wonderful Life? I don't know.
Right.
I don't know how would you be able to prove that? Because there's nothing in the movie about political, government economic systems. It's just a man showing this generosity.
Yeah.
But the thing is, communists will praise the idea of the socialist man, who basically abandons all individual ambition, and his entire, makeup is for the social good, basically, right? And so it's if it's subversive, it's pretty darn clever. But if it's not subversive, it's a darn good set of Christian principles that are in the movie. And so how can we differentiate between the two when we're talking as Christians, do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting because there is the distinct possibility that those working on the film could have had influence, maybe leave it at that for now, influence of these things. And so they might put it in certain ways, like, painting the wealthy elite as the villain
Mhm.
just based on that alone. Power struggles there, um, the rich and the oppressed and all that
Mhm.
stuff. And yet at the same time they might stumble upon some common grace elements of good versus evil and those kind of things. So
Mhm.
storytelling, I think, during this era hadn't got quite as driven by some of the more, I don't know, maybe I haven't watched enough movies to say that completely, but I don't feel like some of these earlier films were as driven by those agendas as they are today. Maybe they were
Mhm.
influenced at times, but not so much driven.
Mhm.
Whereas now I think sometimes it's just blatant. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I guess I really can't say that for certain, but that's my feeling on it.
Mhm.
Um, I think the elements that do appear as far as being noble Christian themes, um, I think you can, especially with a film like that, you can embrace them, you can see them for what they are, and maybe be aware that you are starting to see some of the influences of these other worldviews into things like this. It is interesting. Like I was just kind of was quickly looking it up, and you mentioned Trumbo,
Yeah.
Dalton Trumbo was the name.
Mhm.
He actually did write a draft of this film. Um, yeah, it,
What?
yeah. So the ownership of the rights exchanged hands multiple times. And so at one point in time, he did work on a version that was ultimately scrapped. Um,
Okay.
he, in that draft, ironically, George Bailey is an idealistic politician who
Oh,
grows more cynical as the story progresses. And after
that
losing an election, he tries to commit suicide.
uh
Yeah. So, so the world there was politics rather than
all this
business.
capitalism has got me so cynical. I just
Yeah.
oh.
So it makes you wonder though, like what could have been part of it may have influenced what ultimately came out.
Mhm.
Um, though it was scrapped, I guess I can't say for sure because I really don't know how much made it through. Um, when Frank Capra got a hold of it.
Mhm.
Um,
Evidence is mounting that there may be some
yeah, there at the bare minimum, I would say there's some influence.
there's some influence. Yeah, but it's like it's in this weird era where it's like I don't know if it's the era or just the way the amount of hands in the kitchen or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like it landed in this sort of weird middle place where again there's no overt. I mean, there's sure some tropes in there that
Yeah.
could come from various motives about rich people or whatever, but um, in the end, all you have is an example of a selfless man,
Yeah.
right? That and like it does allow for a different lenses to see it different ways, and sort of the overt Christian spiritual elements of it sort of lend it to probably having Christians want to grab hold of it more, and I don't think they'd be wrong to do so, you know,
Hmm.
um, because there's no imperatives in there until you bring them yourself,
Yeah.
in regards to how to accomplish these virtues in a person, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does appear that Capra did a lot of work to the screenplay.
Hmm.
Apparently, so much that the people who are attributed as writers despised him. Like so.
What do we know about Capra?
I it doesn't sound like he was a wonderful guy. It sounds like one of those guys that just has to have his fingers on everything, micromanages every detail.
Yeah.
I remember reading something about the guy a couple of years ago, and I guess because this movie is like so popular and all that, I guess I thought that he was more of an established filmmaker, and I think he I think he struggled for a while.
Yeah, I guess from what I heard, this movie really was not successful initially. It became more of a
No,
classic over time. Yeah.
like it sunk the production company.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
Yeah, like there was a lot of drama with it,
Hmm.
beyond the film.
Yeah, it's kind of
Um,
like I mean, I've heard of a couple movies that way that were kind of like that. Well, I don't know if they were that bad, but like Shawshank Redemption, for instance, not successful in the box office, but then it became like the most rented movie like ever.
mhm.
But yeah, so some movies take time to really
Yeah,
catch on.
yeah,
Um, yeah, in all honesty, it's like we're diving into the potential motives behind the movie, the potential issues from its original, you know, political writers or whatever. But even if all of it's true, it's like I can't help but almost cry at the end every time I watch it. It's like
yeah, yeah.
it does resonate. Call it common grace, call it whatever you want. It still resonates with me. Um, I can't get over that. But the funny thing about it now though is it's like you go back to the 90s, if you were to bring up all this communist stuff, people would be like, no, that's ridiculous. There's no way this movie has communist influence or whatever.
Yeah.
It may or may not. But the thing is now, with a lot of the youths, as it were, coming out of college and whatever, like if you told them this movie might have like Marxist influence, they'd be like, oh well, good. That
Right.
makes me like it more, you know,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate, but you know, state of things at the moment.
Ironically, it exists, whether it was or wasn't, it exists in a world that is totally dependent upon capitalism. Um,
Hmm.
you know,
Sort of
so
the irony of Hollywood in general these days.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was produced by Liberty Pictures, Liberty Films.
Hmm.
Frank Capra was one of the founders of it. This movie bankrupted it.
Oh
They
my
lost
gosh.
so much money off of this film, even though the film actually did win some Academy Awards and whatnot.
Wow.
Um, I guess it goes to show you that not everything that wins an award is actually well received.
Right.
Um, it in its release, it bombed at the box office, and so by
Hmm.
1947 it was bankrupt or sell. They sold to Paramount, and by 1951 it was closed down. It was defunct.
Wow.
Paramount shut it down. Um,
Alrighty then.
yeah, so Frank Capra went on to do a couple other movies and whatnot. He had a career and all that, but this film company only made two movies as an independent film company. It's a Wonderful Life and State of the Union.
State of the Union. I guess I
That
don't
would
know
be
much
an
about that one.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be an interesting thing to check into. Like,
Yeah.
what was that movie like?
Yeah. So, all right. So, in summary, before we move on to some completely different, uh, mo- well, we're going to continue on with some political stuff, you might say, but very, very different. Um, any closing thoughts in regards to this relationship between this and Christianity, politics, the
Yeah.
whole hodgepodge? What do you think?
As far as this film directly and its influence with, or its tones and types and whatever that are part of Christianity,
Mhm.
sacrifices are indeed a part of life, and as believers, as Christians, we are
Yeah.
called to love one another. We're called to put others before ourselves, and the gospel of grace enables us to do that.
Let me interrupt here.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to interrupt when you're talking about the gospel of grace because that's not the question. That's not the question I was going to ask.
Sure.
But, yeah, I guess I should have before summarizing. I guess I should have made this more of a main question. But I guess it's a good sort of
Yeah.
final question. Maybe what is the relationship between Christianity and individual ambition or lack thereof? Because that is sort of a big enemy of socialism, basically.
Yeah.
Into like have you ever seen have you ever seen A Beautiful Mind?
I have. It's been a long time, but I
You,
have.
you can kind of see Ron Howard's lefty opinions seep in a little bit. I mean, he was, I guess, being true to the economic opinions and influences of the actual person the movie's about. But
Okay.
the beginning of the movie, he's arguing with his classmates about what's his name, Adam Smith, and they're basically saying individual ambition serves the common good. That was sort of the free market
Hmm.
argument, and then he wanted to moderate that basically, and so that's sort of what's if this has if it has communist influence, you can see how that influences their view of George Bailey's ambitions. The whole beginning of the movie,
Sure.
he's like, I want to see the world. I want to build buildings. I want to, do all these amazing things. And time after time after time, he has to sacrifice it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so there's a communist interpretation of that, and there's a Christian interpretation of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the difference between the two?
Well, I would say, I guess for me personally, I don't know how well I can speak to the communist interpretation of that. I would say for the person, like the Christian interpretation of that, I would say that it's coming from a place of love for the people that are a part of his life. He wants to do better for them. He uses the resources he has and his giftings as running the business and loan operation. Forget what it was called. The name of their family business was. He uses that and his ability to run that for the betterment of others. I think that all of that could be twisted under communism, but the way that I would say it is personal ambition doesn't necessarily go away. God gifts us all very uniquely. Each one of us has giftings and talents and are called into different spheres of life. Vocation, I think, is something that's not clearly taught these days. Vocation has some sense of calling involved in it. So I believe that God gifts people to do certain things, and not all of that means like ministry roles. Sometimes that means like people are really actually gifted for business and various things like that. And so I think part of the sacrifices that we see in this film that go along with that is, it's not all about building up the self. It's not all about my empire. He uses the resources and tools that he has for the betterment of his brother, the betterment of those in his community that he cares about. He's willing to sacrifice his hopes and dreams, but at the same time, it's not like the politicized view of that. Like he's not sacrificing everything of himself for the greater good of I guess the socialist agenda.
The state.
Right. You don't see any of that really, in my opinion, but you do see him caring for others, which is, I think, a gospel message. We are called to love one another and use the things that God has given us, the giftings he's given us, talents. You look at the parable of the talents. I was just looking at that the other day. The master in that parable, representing Christ, tells these servants to use the giftings that they've had to use his resources wisely. And you can tell, like, in the end of it, the ones that knew the master, the ones that had faith in who he was, knew he was going to return, used those resources wisely. While the one at the end, who buried it in a grave or whatever, buried it in a field or something and forgot about the master, he honestly didn't believe in him. He didn't have faith that the master was going to return. So kind of his thought is, well, at the end of the day, I still got this coin. Even if he never comes back, I've got it. It's just buried somewhere. I'll go back and get it. And he doesn't know him. You see it. He's like, you're a harsh master. He didn't know him. He didn't believe him. He didn't really truly know him. Otherwise, he would have gone and done the very thing he was asked to do. So all that to say, God equips us for lots of different things. People have different giftings, talents. I don't think there's anything wrong with using business acumen. There's a big word for me. Business acumen to be successful, to build a life, as long as there's a sense of generosity born out of grace and gratitude that comes along with that.
Yep. All right. I think that's a pretty good summary. Pretty good analysis. I don't have too much to add to that, really.
I feel like I rambled, but I have a tendency.
No. Yeah, I think God does make people to differ in their wealth, I think, and that's okay. It depends on what you do with it, really.
Yeah.
And is your motive going to be love in the midst of all of it? Is your motive going to be centered around the gospel? And I'd say, yeah, you did point out, I think, a distinction there between, sort of the state-centered socialist, sort of thing versus being centered around your actual community. I think there is a distinction there, and you can see it in the movie to an extent where George Bailey does focus, scripturally it says that the one who doesn't provide for the needs of his household or for the household of what the needs of his household is worse than an unbeliever. But then it talks about caring for the household of faith. But then ultimately everyone, but there is an order of priority. And that's basically what you see in the movie. He's not a statist in his actions.
Right. Which I would say is the delusional part. Maybe delusional is the wrong word. The hypocrisy, the lie that comes with communism, and my understanding of it is, sure, it's cloaked in taking care of others, like you said a little bit earlier, this love for brothers, our comrades, as they probably would say, in arms. But the reality is, who actually is benefiting from it? It actually still is the elite that are benefiting from it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good summary. We'll spend about 40 minutes on that. So, hey, it's about...
Wowzer.
Yeah. So we'll probably go a little quicker on the second part here, but are you ready for our headline of the week?
Sure.
All right. Okay, we're about to take I'd say a bit of a darker turn here. I would say. So I'm embarrassed at how familiar I am with this story, given how fascinated I was with it. But how familiar are you? How familiar are you with all that's been going on with Ye, formerly known as Kanye West?
So I've read a handful of articles. I think I've followed it. Maybe not as recent, more when things were kind of first coming to light. I think I caught bits and pieces of the Alex Jones interview. I saw when he got kicked off of Twitter, or at least suspended. I guess I don't know if he's back yet, but
not looking like it's going to happen anytime soon. Yeah.
So I think I've missed some things, but I'm not surprised by.
That's another story we'll have to revisit at some point, is the state of Twitter, which has been fascinating.
There you go.
But, because we did cover that before. But yeah. So I guess maybe I should just run through the timeline, because we're kind of late to the game with this story. It really hit its peak a week ago, probably more. But basically, Ye, he was on Twitter and he made a bit of a controversial tweet that was a little bit vague and confusing about going DEFCON on Jewish people. He meant to say DEFCON, but I guess he spelled it wrong. We've talked about the Daily Wire a bit. This is something that fascinated me about it. This is probably why I got a little obsessed, because I've been following conservative media and stuff like that, the state of things, and following different commentators' takes on various topics. And this created a very interesting situation regarding to the Daily Wire, in that one of the main guys there, Ben Shapiro, is Jewish. But then there's also Candace Owens, who's friends with Ye, has been for a bit. And she came out initially after that tweet with a bit more of a defensive take. Basically, it looks like he was hurt by some Jewish friends, and this tweet's a little vague as to what he means. And so I think we need to listen and figure out what's going on. And Ben Shapiro was immediately like, no, it's anti-Semitic. Cut it out. And so I was like, okay, I'm looking at it from the lens of well, this is interesting how this could divide conservative media. And of course, the left was gleeful to see a little bit of apparent racism from the right. They love to see that to prove their points and all that. So then, let's see what happened after that. next thing I remember, anyways, I'm sure I'm skipping some of the major sort of beats in the story, but eventually he was on Tim Pool's podcast. Have you ever watched Timcast IRL?
I think I've watched a couple.
Yeah. Oh, so this happened. Oh, I skipped what led to the Timcast episode. He ended up getting together with Milo Yiannopoulos and oh darn, where does his name go? Super, almost more important of a name at this point. Well, the it'll come to me when I stop thinking about it. But Milo Yiannopoulos and the other pretty well known white supremacist guy got together with Ye, and they went to see Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. And boy, what's his name? I'm gonna have to look it up. This is gonna drive me crazy.
Nick Fuentes.
Nick Fuentes. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, and so Nick Fuentes. Now this is interesting. I want to say this right up front here to future commenters on this video. This story has made me question, like, lose faith in humanity. What little faith I had in humanity lessened as this happened, because so you maybe saw, I think you saw something I tweeted, put on Facebook, whatever. Basically, I knew anti-Semitism was a thing, but there was like a lot of left-wing sort of accusation of such a thing on the right. There's always saying this was a problem on the right, and with Donald Trump, there was a rise in racism, rise in anti-Semitism, all this stuff. All these accusations were flying, and I was like, most of this is garbage. I don't believe this. This is, it's all exaggerated. Then I saw Nick Fuentes a long time ago, and I was like, oh, well, there's that. You're expecting Santa. You're right, mean squared error. It's clickbait. Sorry. Well, we're sort of Christmas themed. We were before, but anyways, all this to say, I was making a larger point. I saw Nick Fuentes and his, like, he was doing a live stream once. I was like, oh, so this is the alt-right, the actual alt-right. This is the actual sort of underbelly of the right that actually is racist. I was like, okay, well, now there's that category. It does exist, but I still think it's over. But at that point, I was like, but it's still overblown. That's not the main right wing in my mind. Then this happened. I still feel that way for the most part, but as I was watching these interviews with Ye and reading the comment sections, I was like, the amount of support his comments were getting were unbelievable to me. And so all that to say, if you're in the comment section, you're not going to last long if you start pulling that. Okay. You're not. And also, I'll just say, based on all that I've read, none of you are original. You've said the same three comments over and over and over and over again. Same Dave Chappelle joke, same quote from somebody way back. It's like same three things over and over. You think everyone who disagrees with you are sheeple if they aren't anti-Semitic, but you have the most sheeple comment section I've ever seen. So that's my opinion. Shut up. I don't care about your opinion. Okay, I've said it. We got that off my chest. Anyways, so then after that happened in Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump, then they Nick Fuentes, Milo Yiannopoulos, Ye, all went on Timcast's show, and after the slightest tiny bit of pushback from Timcast, Ye storms out of the podcast. Okay. Next thing you know, he's showing up with a Balenciaga mask on Alex Jones, right? And that's where he said some of his most shocking stuff that most people watching this probably already know about. Yeah, I saw some of that. I was like, okay, he's pretty much gone in full. I think as crazy as Alex Jones is, he made Alex Jones look pretty uncomfortable and sane in that, which was hilarious.
Right.
And I would actually say I heard Alex Jones talking about it afterwards, and he actually was like, I think he may have hit on kind of what was going on in Ye's head. He's like, I think he kind of got a dopamine hit from saying the most controversial thing he could. And now he's just pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And so I think there's so many factors in it with like bipolar and whatever. I mean, there's so much you can say about it. That's not to excuse the things he's saying, because just because you're bipolar doesn't mean you're going to have bad opinions. The two kind of go together and amplify each other, I suppose. I don't know. But then that happened. And then this is a clip I'll show really quick. Douglas Wilson actually did a bit of a critique of this video about it. This is Gavin McInnes attempting an intervention. Let's see here. I got to get this right. Censored TV, yeah. So this was Gavin McInnes attempting an intervention on Ye. So we'll watch just a few minutes at the beginning. I think one of the things, again, that sort of drove my... Again, I'm monologuing here. I do hope we converse about this after the fact, but I'm trying to get the whole picture. Hope y'all don't think I'm drowning out Caleb here. I want his commentary on this, but I'm trying to get the full picture because it's all kind of now in the past. We have an overarching view. I'm trying to set it up so we can talk about it a little bit. But yeah, this, basically one of the things that caused me to really almost obsess about this story for a while was I want more clarity. I want Ye to clarify his statements. Does he possibly mean this? Could he possibly have this charitable take? And every time he went to a new interview, he clarified more and more that, yeah, his opinions are actually that bad. And so here's McInnes sort of, in my mind, making sort of the final attempt, giving the most charitable take, the most non-PC, but still relatively acceptable take on what Ye might be saying. But we'll get Ye's response here.
I'm going to have an intervention here for you and Nick, and let me just make a case. Yes, there are almost 80 to 90% of Hollywood is Jewish, probably more. Media, yeah, I'm going to say 80% of media is Jewish, but I see the Jews we're talking about in these cases as liberal elites, high IQ people, whites, and when you have, they're disproportionately represented in medicine too, because they have high IQs. So the problem isn't these Jews, and most of them are secular Jews, atheists. I don't see Soros as Jewish. So we have these secular, mostly atheist Jewish people with high IQs who dominate fields that tend to require high IQs. They're overrepresented in...
See, he's even getting risky in his defense here, in that he's pushing towards what some demonize as, race essentialism in terms of IQ. There's some pretty extreme views on that, in how much you want to differentiate different races based on IQ. He's willing to go that far and entertain that possibility in order to say, okay, but we still, you'll get his point here.
Chess and mathematics too. So the real issue here, and there is an ethnomasochism, there is some sort of let's burn it to the ground.
Apparently Ye booted Milo Yiannopoulos. Milo Yiannopoulos is actually, I guess, Jewish. and then apparently Milo came out and became honest and said the only reason he brought the guys to Donald Trump was to make Donald Trump's life miserable, because there's a whole backstory there with Milo and his actual motives and opinions. We won't get into him, but anyways, so now it's just Ye and Nick Fuentes here.
But I think that trait is a white trait, a liberal elite white trait. Oh, not even white per se, a liberal elite trait. Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, they also have these traits. And there's some sort of lemming DNA in white people where when they reach a certain amount of success, they just want to take it off a cliff. And I don't like when Jews get pulled into that, because when I think of my Orthodox Jewish friends and even my Hasidic friends, these people are conservative, Trump-supporting, American patriots, and the Jews that are getting lumped in with this sort of ethnomasochistic cultural suicide tend not really to be Jewish. I call them Ginos, Jews in name only. It's liberal elite whites you should have a beef with.
Yeah, but I lump them all in together. That's what I did. That's
good.
That's why the tweet said that, Jewish people.
Okay.
So then he pushes a little more to get some clarity here.
But this trait, blacks are overrepresented in violent crime. But when you meet an individual black person, you don't apply that. You start with a fresh slate every time you meet someone. Do you do that with Jews?
Nope.
This intervention isn't going very well.
So there you go. I think that's all we need to see. Oh boy. And this is what the differentiation I've seen. Like, this is what's so frustrating in the comment sections, where it's like Gavin McInnes is willing to go so far as to say, sure, they're like overrepresented in a lot of these fields that require high IQs and stuff like that. What he's rejecting is the conspiratorial nature of it, where they're colluding with one another, right? And that's where, like, everyone kind of wanted that clarity from me. Is like, are you just saying they're overrepresented? Is that all you're saying?
Yeah.
Or are they literally conspiring against you? And he's like, nope, they're conspiring against me. It's like, nope, his opinion is as bad as it can possibly get. And this is like, and this is where the comment sections are driving me crazy. Again, I don't care about your opinion if you show up in the comment section about this. You're not unique, and you're not original in your opinions. Okay. So yeah. 80% of media in Hollywood is Jewish. Is that what he said? I mean, Gavin McInnes might be pushing it too far in order to give the best reading of what Ye is saying, but like, that might be a way overinflated number, but it might not be. I mean, it is very extreme. The representation of Jewish people in the media. I mean, it's very high. You can get in trouble for saying that, but I mean, it's true. They are very successful culturally right now. It's true. The anti-Semitic bit comes in when you say they're conspiring with one another, or that they're by nature conniving or running the world. You know, that's the conspiracy theory anti-Semitism that Kanye West is promoting. Yeah, and so there's the big picture now. Okay, I think I've painted it explicitly enough. What are your thoughts now, Caleb? Have I added anything to the conversation for you?
I think I'm done listening to his Jesus album he put out a couple years ago. Yeah, I mean, it's jarring, you know. It makes me very concerned for him.
Oh yeah.
I've watched this from a distance. I've never been a massive Kanye fan by any means.
Yeah.
I
think we were all maybe a little excited when he was like becoming, Christian with his music and all that stuff.
There was a hope there. I mean,
Yeah.
me and the former lead pastor of our church, Derek Lewandowski, we used to do a podcast called Grace Walk, and we had a bonus episode totally directed at Kanye when he released that album.
Yeah.
And I think something that we mentioned in that, I think, keeps coming back into my mind when I think about where he's at now, and that was I have a very big concern about celebrities or athletes or anybody like that gets thrown up on a platform immediately after making some kind of profession of faith. And I think the concern that I have is nobody's discipling these people. And I think with Kanye, there's probably some deeper seated issues than just he's fizzling out as somebody who's allowing celebrityism to get to him. I think he is addicted to celebrityism and is notorious for his ability to make everything about himself.
Yeah.
This
is all part of his presidential campaign, by the way.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about him early on, the thing early on was like, I guess he was supposedly, what gave kind of some Reformed people hope was he was being supposedly discipled by a pastor who went to Master's Seminary, John MacArthur's whole thing. So, and he was like, in some interviews, he's talking about expository preaching and a lot of gospel-centered statements. You could see some of those influences that were there early on during the supposed conversion, where it was like, let's see where this goes. Apparently that's just not the case anymore. Just continuing to cut off people. I mean, one theory I had, this is my most optimistic take, is that, buckle for this. Maybe he really is saved. Okay. God is allowing him to stumble to this extent so that he's actually finally out of public life decisively, and actually loses his celebrity status and becomes, and is actually on his own, so that he hits bottom and actually maybe this is what it takes,
Yeah.
for him to be sanctified.
So I'm about to bring it full circle.
Okay.
Perhaps a verse that applies to both It's a Wonderful Life and Kanye West.
Okay.
For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his own soul? Matthew 16.
There you go.
Yeah, I think just in general, if you're possibly, and I hope probably, onto something with that the Lord in his sovereign purposes would allow Kanye to make a complete fool out of himself. Almost said something else. Complete fool out of himself, and say, I mean, I will be really straightforward. These are very hurtful things that he's saying.
Mhm.
But maybe he's permitting him to completely lose all of this celebrityism for the sake of his soul. Because what matters more here?
Mhm.
Money, wealth, success, the branding of Ye, Kanye, whatever.
Mhm.
No, none of that matters. None of that matters. And so God can strip all that away for the betterment of Kanye.
Mhm.
And I hope, I don't wish evil on anyone, but I hope that is what the Lord is doing.
Mhm. Yep. It's the most optimistic take I can give you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a pretty good summary. I was aching to talk about this at some point. With the amount of time I've wasted in investing, wondering what the heck's going to happen with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't even touch on the whole Twitter bit. We don't need to. No, don't need to. We need to kind of maybe touch on Twitter. Like last time we talked about Twitter, it was right on the verge of Elon buying it finally.
Yeah.
And we were giving our takes on whether it would happen, whether it would be good or bad.
I think it happened within like 36 hours of that conversation.
That's right. Like you gave your take. You're like, yeah, I think it's going to happen. And I was like, I'm leaning that way, but it's kind of weird. I don't know. But then it happened. So, and now there's a billion opinions about what he's doing with it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's worth future conversation for a future headline of the week. But it's time to move on from headline of the week. Are you ready for our theology corner?
Indeed.
Alrighty. So, what are we talking about this week?
We're talking about the regulative principle versus the normative principle.
Yes. What does that have to do with Christmas? Because I did promise we're going to be talking back. We're going to be circling back around to Christmas for our final segment here. So, what does that have to do with Christmas? And what does it even mean?
I think the reason you brought it up was to talk about how the holidays impact our worship.
That's right.
Specifically, I mean, I assume this is kind of the route we were going to take, but even at our church at Grace Life, we do an Advent series. We sing some Christmas hymns, Advent hymns, all that kind of stuff. We even have a Christmas tree.
But it. Oh well. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay. So the reason we ask the question, this might be a surprising question to some, but there's a lot of Christians out there for various reasons who think that Christians should not celebrate Christmas or a variety of holidays. Why is that? There's a couple reasons we could talk about. A couple come to mind, and maybe more than one relate to the conversation. But what comes to mind first when you hear about this?
Typically, when I hear about it from people, I want to be kind of gracious with it, but there is an argument that gets kind of under my skin and gets a little bit annoying. But usually it is from the side of, well, Jesus wasn't born in December, and which I want to be accurate. He wasn't.
Actually, well, that's another part of the conversation. Actually,
There was an interesting.
it's possible he was between December and January.
Right. There was an interesting article, and I meant to look it up. Saw it last year maybe, and it poked holes in almost all of these arguments. And it's actually by a guy who I actually probably disagree with based on the regulative principle. Mainly because he is a strict adherent to it, and I'm not as strict. But he did
We
an
still have to
article-
define what that means, but we'll
Yeah,
get to that.
We'll get there. Kevin DeYoung. I
Oh.
do appreciate Kevin DeYoung, but he's pretty,
Yeah,
strict
but
on his
I think he probably
regulativeness.
likes Christmas, though, doesn't he?
But he does. He does like Christmas.
Okay.
Um,
I love Kevin DeYoung. He's like one of my
Yeah,
earliest Reformed influences.
yeah, and one of his books makes it into my like top 2 books that everybody should read. So yeah, but he poked a bunch of holes through the whole like Christians celebrating it because they wanted to basically pacify the Romans and all this stuff. It's really the celebration of the pagan gods, Saturnalia or Sol Invictus or whatever. Some of the Roman cults and stuff like that.
I've got to talk about that. Well, we're going to look at a little bit of a Lutheran satire video relating to that.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, I'm only going to do maybe a quarter of it because, again, copyright. Although I don't think Lutheran satire would care, but go ahead.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's typically where people go. They try to connect the dots to like pagan worship and how this was just to appease them. And we Christians really know what it's, that those things are, conspiracies and whatnot.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
but there's a big issue I have with that I'll mention since you're talking about that now, do you want to keep talking about that, or do you want me to actually show the video because it relates? Because you probably, I don't know if you want to. Well, it's up to you.
Show the video.
Okay, we'll show the video because it relates to what you're talking about right now, and it's relevant to comments I want to make. But yeah. Anyways, let's see here. Let me look at this. There's the old video. We want to go here. All right, YouTube, the old YouTubes.
Well, thanks to all of you for coming out to our service this morning, and I pray that the rest of this Christmas day is wonderful for each and every one of you.
Not so fast, preacher man. Behold, it is I, Horus, Egyptian god of the sun, and while you all believe that you've been celebrating the birth of your Lord Jesus, you've really been celebrating the birth of me. For you see, thousands of years before your Jesus came around, I, Horus, was born on December 25th. I, Horus, was born of a virgin. I, Horus, was baptized by a man called Anup the Baptizer, was
I
crucified
think
and
one
was
of the comments said that sounds like a Yu-Gi-Oh reference or something.
resurrected
the
3 days
baptizer.
later. So you see, your Jesus is nothing more than plagiarized poppycock, and I, Horus, have come to feast upon the sorrow of you foolish Christians.
Yeah, none of the stuff you just said is true.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it
No,
is.
there's no reference in Egyptian mythology to Horus being crucified or resurrected 3 days later. There's no documentation anywhere for the existence of a figure named Anup the Baptizer. Horus, his mother, was not a virgin woman, but the goddess Isis, and there is no specific date anywhere tied to the birth of Horus.
I'm pretty sure there is.
Actually, no. All of these claims and many others indicating that early Christians yoinked the mythology of Horus and stuck it on top of Jesus were all completely made up by Gerald Massey, a 19th century cuckoo banana bird self-taught Egyptologist who never provided the slightest shred of evidence for any of these claims and who was laughed out of the room by every serious Egyptologist on the planet. So thank you very much for your attempt to ruin our celebration of Christ's birth, but I'm afraid we're all still having a very Merry Christmas, Horace.
Horus? Did I say my name was Horus? No. What I meant to say was, behold, it is I, Mithras, Roman
Mithras.
cultic god of the something, and while you all believe that you've been celebrating...
Okay, I don't want to watch the entire thing, but he goes through like 3 different ones, and then he ends on a Ghostbusters villain. I recommend you look up the video. I should have put it in the description. I'll probably add it afterwards, and then when I upload this as a chapter, I definitely want to link to it. But hilarious video, actually informative while being funny. But one thing I wanted to point out with that's interesting is that he talks about the original scholar who like made that stuff up.
Yeah.
A lot of Christians hear these things and they don't realize the motives of the people who spread these things in the first place. They weren't just trying to debunk Christmas. They were trying to debunk Christianity. Right. So why on earth are we taking their opinion seriously about Christmas? It makes no sense to me. But like, that's one objection Christians have had to Christmas, that it has pagan origins in some way. They don't go the full way and say, well, Christ is debunked, but they'll say, well, the holiday in its present form was like it was a use of pagan, traditions, and it was reinterpreted or reformed into something compatible with Christianity, basically.
Right.
And so
to make Christianity palatable or something.
Right. And a lot of the time, like I asked this question on social media a while back. I was like, wait a second. Let's just say for a second that that's true, that Christmas actually was a reformatting of pagan celebrations or something like that. Mean Squared Air's got a comment. I'll get to that. But my point, the question I asked was like, look, let's say that's all true. It's a reformatting of pagan religions to make it more Christian. Are you saying that if I therefore celebrate Christmas and in my mind, in my heart, I'm worshiping Christ, it somehow gets transferred to the worship of an idol? Like, is that what you're saying? Like, how does this work exactly if you're right? I don't know.
I think there's a common thread in some of those conspiracy ideas. I lump that into conspiracy ideas.
Yeah.
Where there's like this belief that somehow as a Christian, you can accidentally begin to worship something other than Christ.
Yeah, it's the accident.
When you are intending to worship Christ.
That drives me crazy.
Me intending to worship Christ will somehow accidentally become an atheist, or like first of all, if you are in the Reformed world and you somehow believe that can happen, shame on you, because that goes against the very core of your Reformed theology. Second, if you are a Christian, I would like to introduce you to some of these doctrines and help you to understand why there's no accidental worship going on.
Mm-hmm.
There was something that went around during the time of COVID about masks and accidentally becoming a Muslim if you wear a mask. That by wearing a mask, you're identifying.
I've never heard
Muslim.
that one. That's amazing.
It made me so angry when I read this, and I'm sorry, but that's just not how belief works. It's not how worship works. So yeah. It's lame arguments that go to a very anti-biblical understanding of how worship actually works.
Okay, so that's one objection to Christmas, that it's pagan. But there is another one I think is a little more interesting of a conversation, honestly. I mean, one's interesting because it's hilarious. The other one's interesting because it does raise some interesting questions. Now let's get back to what you mentioned before. What about this issue of regulative? What is regulative principle versus normative principle? What do these mean?
So just off of a cursory refresher that I did today, the regulative principle maintains that Scripture gives specific guidelines for conducting our worship.
Right.
And really that churches shouldn't add anything beyond those guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
So it's common that in churches that practice this regulative principle, it's common that there's no instrumentation in their music, in their praise.
I have a close family member who's in a church right now that there's no instrumentation, and you were probably about to mention it, but they're also exclusive psalmody, which means they only sing from the Psalter. They don't, which isn't, well, I won't give my opinion on it yet, but go ahead and continue defining.
I do think it tends to be more common amongst Reformed churches, but there is a Pentecostal, I will say, branch of all this too. I don't know if they would claim the regulative principle, but UPC and other variations of it. There are some. What is it? Is it There's a Church of Christ variant that doesn't use instrumentation.
Oh, that's right.
Um,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and because of this idea of the specific guidelines for conducting corporate worship. So they're going to be in its most extreme of this, they're going to be very strict on things like women and women's dress in the service, the order of service and spiritual gifts. I guess it goes down the the list of what it might be, but they're not going to include things that are outside of scriptural guidelines. And so just because there's something that's traditional in a church, they might not accept that just because human traditions accept it.
Right. They were, yeah. And so I guess historically, the representatives of this that I've heard, like Martin Luther would have been more of a normative principle, and like John Calvin would have been more regulative principle. I guess the best summary I heard was like regulative is there's these specific instructions we have of what we are to do in worship, and unless it is prescribed in Scripture, you don't do it, basically. Whereas the normative principle is it is permitted unless it's forbidden explicitly.
Right. Yeah. I would say the thing that has to be understood about the normative, in case you are coming from the regulative standpoint, is nobody in the normative principle that I'm aware of, maybe some extreme examples, but nobody I know is going into how they arrange their worship services going, I don't care what the Bible says, we're doing it this way.
Right.
There might be some extremes, of course, because there's extremes in everything. And there might be some misguided things going on, which probably more or less comes down to a misinterpretation of some scriptural elements. But the people I know typically tend to approach the normative idea of things is that if it's not expressly forbidden by Scripture, it can be used in corporate worship if it's done wisely and in good practice, not trying to be disruptive, not trying to overindulge. An example of that might be the use of instrumentation in worship. It might be the use of PowerPoint in presenting the scriptures.
Yeah, and that's sort of the thing I found about people who call themselves regulative, as embracing the regulative principle. They tend to kind of vary in application, even though they go by the same label. And that there's plenty of people who call themselves regulative who do use instruments or do sing things outside of the Psalms. It's just like they have a broader interpretation of what Scripture is prescribing. It says like sing songs to the Lord. It's like, well, we interpret that as we're allowed to write a new song. And so I feel like there's a lot of people who are regulative that you would think they're normative. It's just their interpretation is different, and maybe vice versa. There's people who are normative, but they're incredibly, centered on what Scripture says to do in worship. But how does this relate to Christmas?
Yeah, so I think the adding of anything related to Christmas to certain regulative principled people could be seen as being unscriptural.
Right, particularly, like holiday Christmas elements in the service for one, but then like just generally the celebration of extra biblical outside of Scripture, holidays. Now, I mentioned Mike Winger when we were talking before. I think we're sort of by our tone communicating our opinion on all of this. We're both pretty open to Christmas. Well, I mean, you already mentioned, we have a Christmas tree in our service. And we have a lot of themed preaching and worship going on right now, surrounding Christmas, happily. And so one pushback that I heard, I'm not fully prepared to argue for this, but I heard it, and it's an interesting point. I mentioned Mike I saw a sermon portion from him where he's talking about whether or not we should have extra biblical holidays. And apparently there's evidence that Jesus himself observed some traditional celebrations that were not in the Old Testament, which would have been their scriptures at the time. There were holidays that developed out of the intertestamental period between the Old and New Testament, and I guess whatever it's called now, Hanukkah, Season of Lights, or whatever. There's evidence apparently in Scripture that Christ partook in that and didn't object to it. I mean, there's obviously plenty of human traditions that violated the Word of God that he did object to. But apparently that wasn't one of them, if that's true. So that's an interesting point that I would say lends credence to the normative take, perhaps.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing. When you brought that up earlier, I definitely want to check that out because I don't think I've ever heard that. But I guess it wouldn't be all that shocking considering by the time of Jesus' life and ministry, that was a pretty normal thing in Jewish life. So, not that shocking if he was participating in it. I think for me, I think most people who fall on perhaps the more extreme regulative principle scale would probably say I'm completely normative, and I would say that I'm probably a little bit of both in some ways. I guess maybe where I fall is I think we're both in their best versions try to fall, and that's that the scripture should guide us.
Right.
I do think that we have some liberty with the way that a worship gathering takes place. I think there are some things that are essential. First of all, I think for a worship gathering to be called a worship gathering, it needs to be the ecclesia. It needs to be the local expression of the body of Christ.
I think sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think a good principle I heard, sort of general guideline of it, was you kind of start regulative, get your instructions of what elements should be included in the service, and include them all. And then if you want to add something, don't add it if it's going to remove one of the things that's essential. Fit all the essential things in, and then whatever else there is, then consider that. But once one of them is deleted, then there's probably an issue.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, so I think it's the assembling of the saints. I believe that there is the fellowship of the saints. There's the hearing of the word. There is the singing aspect. I believe that singing should be essential. Now, how many instruments are used is, I guess, up to the local expression.
If there's an electric guitar, though, you're of the devil. We know that.
Yes, so that's obvious. Hesitations, chapter 4.
Yes. Percussion is probably demonic.
Oh, there's lots to be said. I've heard lots of things. The preaching, I believe, is essential. I believe that can look a lot different than what it looks like in most American traditions. If it looks like something you might find in North Korea, where it's a family of 3 hidden under a blanket, quietly whispering the scriptures to one another and encouraging one another in Christ, I believe that that's an expression of that. In some of those situations, it might be really hard to argue for the regulative principle. That I guess that's one thing that needs to be said in that, but I think that we also have freedom to here's an Acts 29 word for you, not exclusively, but the church planting network that we're part of. We have liberty to contextualize what it looks like. So what it looks like in Avon, New York, in some ways may not look exactly the same way as it looks in LA, California. Now, the essentials need to probably remain the same in that, most basic understanding of it, but there are certain things that are going to look a little bit different where we are. Definitely across the world, like I mentioned North Korea, but pick a country on the continent of Africa. Things are going to look a little bit different, especially with the music and, the the expression of people's I guess how do I want to say it? The expression of their worship. I feel like that kind of cheapens the word worship a little bit, but the expression of the people's joy and involvement in the gathering, I think, will look different if it's under a tree, in the woods somewhere, or if it's in a building with lots of tradition and years of history.
Yeah. Mean Squared Error says Avon, New York gave us the first Tom Walls. What a great little town. I guess he's heard of us. Our church is in a plaza literally right behind that Tom Walls.
Yes.
So come on by and get a burger.
If you find the Tom Walls, you can find us.
Yes. All right. That's a lovely summary, I think. I think we basically gave our opinion and rebutted a couple things, at least insofar as we were able. I know there's much more. I mean, there might be some Reformed people, real conservative Reformed people who watch this, who are strict regulative and disagree. And I know they tend to have, I hope we didn't straw man too much. We joked around a bit.
Yeah.
I know they have some pretty well-developed arguments surrounding the regulative principle. When I say well-developed, I don't necessarily mean I agree that they're good arguments, but I think they're well-established and they took they're pretty solid in the sense that they're hard to let go of. And so maybe some of what we said came off as a bit dismissive. I don't know, but we disagree, at least insofar as they're applying it in this case. And so sorry if you don't feel we fully articulated your full argument, but that's our take at least. At least, yeah. Hope that makes sense. Cool Cola says, Merry Christmas in case I'm working next week. Well, hello and Merry Christmas. We've got up to 5 people now. This is a pretty solid stream. Not everyone's commenting, but yeah, we usually have like 2. 5 is an improvement. And that's after being gone for, a month. So, hey.
Forever.
Cool. Any closing thoughts, sir?
Enjoy your Christmas celebration if you have grace for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'll say it this way. If you don't feel the liberty to do so, let me encourage you that there is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So if you choose not to celebrate, there's grace for that too.
Yes. Oh, shoot. I want to... I kind of want to throw a monkey wrench in and tackle a separate question, but darn it, I was going to ask this. There's some people who get very upset when a church changes its worship scheduling because of Christmas.
Yes, and that's where me and Kevin DeYoung probably disagree.
Yes. Explain.
So we at Grace Life, the elders specifically, made the determination this year to not gather on Sunday, the 25th, which is Christmas Day.
But it will be Christmas Eve.
We will be gathering on Christmas Eve. Now, there are arguments that I will say are solid arguments as to gathering on the Lord's Day and making that a priority, and those things. And I would agree with that. It is a priority. But we also know that, first of all, there's no law saying that you should have to. And if you don't comply or in obedience, you've lost anything with God or something like that.
Yeah, this is a tricky thing, I think, for us Reformed-ish folks, small r Reformed, in that there is a much more established argument as to why, like among confessional Reformed people, there's a much more established doctrine of the Lord's Day that I think, like, we still hold to a tradition of gathering weekly, and in this case we still will be, but the fact that we move the day at all would violate their more established arguments of the Lord's Day, I think.
Yeah.
So I've seen like Reformed folks on Facebook say, like, if your church isn't gathering for Christmas, find one that is and stay there. So there's some strong opinions on this. That's why
there are some strong opinions on it, and I think social media brings that out. Especially Twitter. You're gonna have a lot of um, lovely arguments on there about it. You know, for me, I guess I don't get too into the weeds on it. I think operating from a sense of liberty and grace is a good starter on these things.
Mhm.
I think as well, you know, like God is a God of rest, and Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And though I know Sunday is not the Sabbath, we're not going there. That's not what I'm trying to say. I think that there is a sense that the way that we worship, the way that we gather, the way we do things with our family, with our friends, we have liberty to occasionally do some things different. I mean, what's the difference between that and taking a vacation where you don't attend a worship gathering that Sunday? You
Mhm.
know, I don't see it. I don't see that being that much of a different thing.
Some would object
Um,
to that.
you know, they're welcome to do so.
Mhm.
Um, I I disagree. I don't see that as being um, a hard and fast rule. But having said that, I do believe that the gathering is important.
Yeah.
Um, I might argue that sometimes we diminish other types of gatherings for the
Mhm.
sake of overemphasizing the Sunday gathering. I think that gathering in smaller gatherings is very important to the life of the body,
Mhm.
and yet we're willing to take weeks and weeks off, sometimes entire summers off from things like small groups and other things, but we're never willing to take a Sunday off.
Mhm.
And I think that sometimes that communicates are unintentionally pretty legalistic.
Mhm. Mean Squared Air says, "Does the Heap family attend that church?"
That they do.
That they do. Yes. Yes, indeed. And then Kukola quotes 2 Timothy 3:16. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished to all good works. Yes, indeed. And that is why, at the very least, it should guide our worship. Although I'm not sure if he's making an argument for the regulative principle or something like that by quoting it. But I'd say both sides would employ that doctrine to establish our worship for sure,
Yeah.
regardless. But anyways, good summary. I threw in a last minute something there, but
And I would be willing on this topic. Like whether we gather on Christmas morning is not one that it's not a hill I want to die on. So if I'm wrong on that, I'm willing to be corrected on that. I just haven't seen anything compelling enough at this point
Mhm.
to make me be like, "Hey guys, we absolutely have to do something."
Yeah. All right. So I think that'll about do it. We touched on everything. We were pretty thorough, I think. I had fun. Did you have fun?
I did.
I did. All right. Well, thank you everybody for showing up. And I don't know. Next week is going to be the 23rd. Do you have any big plans surrounding Christmas that would forbid a pre-Christmas show?
I'll have to get back to you because I don't really know.
Yeah.
I know it gets a little bit crazy for me and my family because the 24th, as we just previously mentioned, we do have a Christmas Eve gathering, and it's two gatherings, and I, being the one who's preaching at it, I'm preaching both services. So my Christmas Eve is rather busy. So sometimes we do some things the night before, the eve of the eve, if you will.
Yes. My dad says, "Good night from your moderator. You didn't introduce me." Yes, my dad is now, I think, our first official moderator in the chat. He's been doing some algorithm study on the channel, so he might be helping us out behind the scenes in the future. We'll see. Well, I mean, it's pretty official at this point. He's already helped me out a bit, so it's not really a we'll see. But yes. So yeah, that'll about do it. And we'll see about next week. I think it works for me. I'm going to be having a 4-day weekend from work, so that'll be nice. So whether we do something or not, perhaps I'll put something out by next week, and we'll see about the live show. So stay tuned. I'll perhaps post I'll perhaps post like the thumbnail and the scheduled show if we make it official in conversation soon. But until then, we'll see you all around in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Nighty night.